Just a little while ago, I got thinking, gee, I forgot this and I forgot that. I don't have much voice.
That's okay.
Can we start it now or what?
Yes.
Can you hear it?
Okay.
Maybe you should introduce
He's
yourself
interpreting, so it will all be on
I'm
sign
George
language.
Jr.
They'll be able to interpret what he's
Beagley.
saying.
Are you recording?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
Not a George Beagley Jr., but my middle name is Junior, and I don't know where Dad and Mother got that from. But I remember when I was 8 years old, he taught me a poem. My name, I got it from my father, 'twas the best I had to give. Right, gladly he bestowed it. It's mine the while I live. Well, Dad was born in Fountain Green, Utah, which is by Nephi, going up the canyon by Nephi. And it was in my grandmother, his mother's uncle's, or her brother's house. And why they were there, I don't know. But I think that Dad, my granddad, was employed out at Mercer, so probably they had to have her there where they could get a doctor to her things. But some interesting things about that is that it's about 5 miles up Fountain Green Canyon, and he was born on October 31st, 1899. And the
October
interesting part,
31st? Is that right?
October 31st of 1899.
Okay.
The doctor lived in Nephi, which was about 5 miles away. And so Dad's uncle had to get his horse saddled and ride 5 miles down into Nephi to get the doctor, and it was raining cats and dogs. That doctor came back in a Surrey, so that it was not enough. So that part I don't know between there and Mercer. But I know that our family comes from the Nephi area, Spanish Fork area, and Levan. And that's where my grandmother's family come from, as well as my grandfather. If you ever go up over the mountain there to go to Price, about 5 miles beyond where you run out of the Red Rock Canyon, off to the north, there's a thing alongside of the road, a cemetery, and somebody's made an ark and photographed that, or built that as an, and if you ever get a chance to stop there, you'll find the name of Beagley there. They're the children of my great-grandfather, John Beagley. Don't know where he's buried, probably in Nephi or somewhere else, but his children are buried there. Well, he was a shoemaker and also worked in the mines out at Mercer. And then Mercer caught on fire 3 times and burned the town down almost completely. But they rebuilt because there was still ore in the mine. They rebuilt, and so the third time they decided there wasn't enough ore in the mine to work anymore. So they moved down out of Mercer out into the flats to a place called Clover. And Grandpa Beagley, my grandpa, settled on 32 acres down in there. And you can imagine they had 5 children, and while they were down there at Clover, they had 4 more. So down there, a little thing about Dad, it was kind of funny to me. There was sagebrush and rabbits, jackrabbits. They ate more jackrabbits than anything in the world. So his dad would give him a shotgun and 2 bullets and say, go get supper. So Dad would take the shotgun. Sometimes he had to walk for a half hour before he could shoot 2 rabbits with the same shell, because he wanted to save a shell for tomorrow. And I thought that was kind of clever. But he, having 5 children, and probably 2 more at the time his father did this, I think Dad was about 14 years old. And while he was 14, he and his dad went for a walk, and his dad put his hand on his shoulder and says, "George, we can't afford you. You've got to move." And at 14 years old, that's kind of tough. But he had a grandmother that was a wife, second wife to John Bigley, the one that had the children up the canyon. She was the second wife. She had 2 children by him. One was a girl, and we don't know her name, and the other was my grandpa, John William Bigley. And Grandma was Grandma Dorothy, and they called her Grandma Dory. You've heard that before. And Grandma Dory had Alzheimer's in her later years, but Dad was very close to her. He always talking about Grandma Dory, how she'd hide her socks under the pillow so nobody'd steal them, things like that. So he lived there for maybe 10 or 11 years, maybe better part of 12 in there. And Grandma Dory, later on married a man by the name of Ostler. I don't know his first name.
How do you spell that one?
Ostler, I think.
Where did Grandma Dory live?
In Tooele.
Tooele?
Yeah, and her husband was,
I think he was from out there too, wasn't he?
yeah, so he went and lived with them, and he became an assistant to Mr., what did I say his name was?
Ostler.
Ostler, as the janitor at the high school. But the schools only went to 8th grade in those days. And so he stayed there with him, and when he was 17 years old, he went to work for AS&R. That's American Smelting and Refining Company. They had the mine up by the canyon. Did you ever go to Grandpa's when they were running the girls' camp?
Mm-hmm.
You could see where that smelter was up there. It's not there anymore. But he went to work up there with his brother, his older brother, Will. And they worked in the lead plant.
What's his brother's name? Will?
William. They called him Uncle Will. They worked in the lead plant, and this is very serious. It's hard because it affects the body. And he worked there for maybe a year, or maybe not even that long, I don't know. But he said he had to leave there because when he'd leave work, he'd go home and he'd have to take a glass of Epsom salts and put water with it and drink that down in order to have bowel movement. So he figured it was time for him to leave there. So he caught a train, got on the train and went to California, to Lodi, California. And in Lodi, California, he worked in the grape orchards and stuff down there for, I think, about a year and a half. And after a year and a half, he probably caught the freight train to come back.
Good idea. How old you were at that time?
19. He caught the train and came back. And a little story about that is that the train, he said, had a blanket somebody had put up underneath the railroad car on the axles or something. And when the train was stopped, he could crawl up in there and lay on this plank, and that's the way he could ride coming home. And then they had to stop, of course, when they came to a town or anything, and they'd have to get out and kind of hide out and try to get back in after. But on the way home, he said, told me, he said the money that he earned working in the grape orchards was some money, and he hid it in his shoes, had to put it in the sole of his shoes so that nobody'd steal it off of him. And every once in a while they couldn't move at night, so they'd have a bonfire, and they'd all sit around, him, and they called them bums in those days. These days we call them homeless, and that was something interesting. This is not at this particular time that he came home, but he if you get a knock on the back door and you go to the back door, and here was one of these bums asking for food. And Dad would never let any of them in the house, but he never turned any of them away. He'd go out in the garage and set a little table that he had and bring him out a quart of peaches and a loaf of bread, because Mother baked bread almost every day in the coal stove. But he would do this for all those homeless people that came. Now, say at age 19 he came home and he went to work for Kennecott, or not Kennecott, for Utah, what did I write that? Utah,
Copper Corporation.
well anyway,
UCC.
Utah
Copper Corporation.
Utah Copper Company at that in those days. And we lived on what they called Whipple Edition. Magna was divided up in several editions. Now I gotta turn the page. And I want to talk about a few things here. Now John William, who was born in 1923, and not exactly true how many hours he lived, but I think it was just a few hours that he lived. He was buried the same day. And Dad and his neighbor, which was his brother-in-law, took orange crates and made a little coffin and wrapped him in a blanket. He's buried up in Magna now. If you ever go there, you'll see where that rebar there, you see it's in where I put that after Mother died. I took some stuff down from here, put the bars off the windows and things, and made that thing that's nice and white and rusty. Now, he was born in 1923 in Magna on Spencer Avenue. The house is still there, and not very well kept, but it's still there. And Glenn was born in 1925 in Spencer Avenue, and I was born in the same house. And Wallace was born on the farm in 1930, July the 5th. Little thing here that just popped into my mind. New Year's Eve, and Dad and Mom had gone to bed. And all of a sudden there was a roar. Guns going off, beating pans and all this stuff. And Mom pushed Dad out of bed. And he went out of the door and hollered at the guy, "What you doing?" He says, "New Year's, George, it's New Year's Eve." But they'd forgotten, and they'd just gone to bed. New Year's Eve. Now, during the Depression, or shortly after, well before, Dad bought 8 acres of ground east of Magna, and he bought that home in that particular place because the irrigation ditch from the canal came down there, and it was easy for him to irrigate his property. And so he, on that property, raised wheat and alfalfa. We had 2 horses, 2 cows, about 20 chickens and 2 pigs that kept us for the depreciation. Now this wheat we would thresh the wheat. And the way we'd thresh the wheat, he'd have 4 acres in wheat. And he'd cut that down and then use it. They had tied in bundles and haul it down by the house. And then the thrashing machine would start down at the end of the street and go from one farm to the other till they got to ours. And then Dad had his brothers and everyone there to help run this threshing machine. And then the wheat we'd take loaded on a T-model Ford truck that we had and haul that to where you take 100 pounds of wheat and they give you 50 pounds of flour back. And we had mush and all these kind of things off there. Of course, we used the horses to help dig the irrigation ditches. He just had a plow to go through to build irrigation ditches. He fenced that 8 acres. We'd have to go out in the west and cut down cedar posts. Somewhere there's a little picture of me with my blonde curly hair, about 2 years old, where I got playing in this T-model Ford truck and took the keys out and lost them. So we had to stay there for 3 days while they figured how to get the thing going. And so they took a picture of me there. We had the picture, had a camera about so wide and so high, and it was kind of tough to take many pictures of it. Let's see. We'll turn the page. During the Depression, I'll get back to that too, Colby. During the Depression, Dad working for Utah Power and Light would work 10 days a month, and then another crew would work 10 days a month, another, so that everybody got to work 10 hours a day, or 10 days a month for 3 hours a day, dollars a day, or $30 a month is what he had. So we didn't have much ice cream, or it wasn't like Dorothy in the prison camp where they had bananas and that bothers him. So I did. Now while the Depression was on, his brother-in-law, Bert Junker, and I never met him because he was either the second or third wife of one of my aunts. And he was working in Las Vegas, or that area, and they were building the Hoover Dam. And we've got the pictures of that in your book. So he took a leave of absence for 6 months and went down there and operated a crane that would carry the cement from the bank out and dump it in the dam and create the dam. But that was all that they'd leave him, was 6 months leave of absence. So he had to come back and go to work. Now, at age 35, Dad got pneumonia. He'd been a smoker. They didn't make cigarettes then, you had to make your own from a Bull Durham sack, they called it. And he had this pneumonia, and the doctor told him at the time that if he kept smoking like he did, it would kill him. So he released him from the hospital, and this was something I didn't remember either. He brought home a gallon of oil. What's the oil you take for the spoon?
Castor oil?
Cod liver.
Cod liver.
Okay.
Cod liver oil. Yeah, and he told the doctor, he said, I can't drink all of this. And I was there with him and he said to me, will you help me? And I said, yeah, I'll help you. So together we drank that whole gallon of oil.
That
At
was
the
for the
time-
pneumonia?
That was for the pneumonia.
Yeah. At the time, he did quit smoking, and he became active in the church. And later on became Sunday school superintendents. Um, while he was superintendent of Sunday school, he was colorblind. He could have one red sock on one foot and a green one on the other foot, and he'd never know it. So before he'd go to Sunday school or anything, which was at 10 o'clock in the morning in those days, we'd have to check his socks, see he had the right colored socks on, and that his pants were zipped, because that was a problem for him, to remember to zip his pants. And he didn't want to have a bad breath, be around people. So we're in the old Model A, and we're going to Sunday school, and he was complaining on the way about his breath. Well, I told him, Dad, let's go uptown and I'll get you some mints or something. So we went uptown, and on Sunday, we didn't realize this before, but none of the stores were open except in the beer hall. So I told him to stop in front of there on the other side, and he said, no, I'm not going to stop there, and I kind of insisted, and so he stopped, and I ran across the road, went in and got him packed a gun for a nickel, and ran back out, and he took the gun, and he was okay. Well, after he'd been active for a while, he and Mother got temple recommends, and we went to the temple, and we were married and sealed in the Salt Lake Temple. But John William had died, of
But
course.
he remember from that period.
What do you remember from that sealing?
Oh, I'm not sure. Probably 1936, maybe 1938. Let's go for that.
Do you remember anything about that yourself?
Yes, but I don't know. Dates don't.
No, not the dates, just what was your experience like? What do you remember about that experience?
All about the experience. Well, in a minute, I got one more thing. John William, of course, was dead. So we had the cousin Dean Rasmussen stand in for him. Now, the things that go on in the temple, we don't talk about necessarily on the temple. However, I can tell you this much, that to be sealed, you go into a special room that has an altar. And the man kneels on one side of the altar, and his wife on the other side of the altar, and they're married for time and eternity, and then they're sealed to each other. Then the children come up and kneel at the altar, and they're sealed to the parents. So that's the way it goes. And then Dad was a 70. Now a 70 is like an elder, only it's between the elder and the high priest in their activities in the church. Since then, the 70s in the stakes have been done away with, and the 70s in the church are general authorities, and their responsibility is the worldwide responsibility of seeing to it that the church doctrine is preached there, and that they don't make up anything that's not given in the scriptures. Is that right?
At the time that they had the 70s in the wards, were they not more or less missionaries?
Yes. Dad served the mission when he was in the Seven Presidents Society. And it's interesting that he met with Ann Bailey. Do you remember her?
Mm-hmm.
He met with Ann Bailey and taught her the gospel, and she was about ready to go to be baptized. Well, what happened is a woman who had left the church and had been married in the temple to her husband went to Ann and told Ann a bunch of lies. And also she went to the priest in Magna and told him that she was thinking about joining it wasn't Ann told him, it was the other one. That Ann was talking about joining the LDS church. And so the priest went to her house and threatened her that she would go directly to hell if she did this. So that ended that. They were always friends for all their life. And now their daughter's married to Steve.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, a little something. While he was in the Seven Princes 70s at Kennecott, by then it was Kennecott, and they went on strike. And so he was out of work and didn't have anything to do. So he went into the storehouse in Salt Lake and asked if he could help out in there, just to work for nothing, just help out to take care of things in there, because we had been there and chucked corn and then made soups and all these things. And so he knew some of the people there. So President Harold B. Lee saw him working there one day, and he went over and talked to him and asked him why he was there every day. And Dad said that they were on strike, and so he was there just to help out. So President Lee told him, he wasn't president of the church then, but he was over the Desert Industries. He told him, he said, Brother Bigley, if you'll bring some of your 70s that are out of work in here to work and help us, because we're really hurting right now for help, I'll see to it that they get groceries. Your bishop, tell him to write you an order for groceries. So Dad came out and met with the 70s in their meeting and told them this. So a whole bunch of them, Uncle Allen and a whole bunch of them agreed to this and went into the Desert Industries and worked in there every day. But when Dad went to the bishop and asked him for an order for groceries, the bishop turned him down. The bishop was a foreman at Kennecott, and he said, told Dad, he said, you guys are on strike, it's your problem. So Dad told President Harold B. Lee that, and he got a grocery list. So they did get some things to help out then. Then Dad started working for a man called Malcolm Moore, who had the Hudson dealership. Hudson's an automobile, and the old Hudson was an Essex. Then it became a Terraplane. Then it became a Hudson Terraplane. And so he learned to work for Malcolm Moore. Now what I'm telling you here is just the type of guy he was. He sold this 38 Chevrolet to a man. And the man, it was a nice looking car, had been painted and everything. And he sold it to a guy he worked with. And later on, after a few days, the guy came to Dad and he said, boy, you really pulled one on me now. That car you sold me has been wrecked. And Dad went with him and they inspected the car and they could see where it had been wrecked. So Dad went to Malcolm Moore and said, we got to give me his money back for that car. We didn't know it was wrecked, and so we didn't. We got to give the car back. And Malcolm Moore said, no, sir. He took the car as is, and they wouldn't give the money back. So about a week later, 2 weeks, Dad said, to Malcolm Moore, he said, I got a car sale for this car, a car that was on the lot. And so Malcolm says, good, go ahead and sell it. So he sold it and went and got the car that he'd sold to him before and brought it back. And Malcolm Moore fired him for a day or two because Dad wasn't, he had to be honest. Now there's another little story. Oh, I went out by my garage one day and Steve and Dad was talking and I didn't know what they were talking about and I asked him and Dad said, or Glenn, Steve said he'd hired Parley Coon to come and thresh his wheat. And he came with his machine and threshed the wheat, and then when he went to leave, the machine, Steve called up on the machine and saw it was half full of wheat. So he accused Parley Coon of stealing his wheat, which he did. But Parley Coon wanted $20 or something to be able to hay. And he was going to just go and steal it off of them. So Dad turned out missing, and he walked over to his house and took off in his car, and came back in about 20 minutes, and I said, well, what are you doing, Dad? And he said, I went to Parley Coon and gave him $20. There's nobody going to make a bad look on the big lease. Everybody knows what Parley Coon is, and it's not going to be the big lease. And another time, the guy that lived up the street, his name was Simmons, and he was always teasing Dad and on his back, but wasn't a very nice guy. And Dad had been going to a doctor, and the doctor suggested that he get some goats and have goat milk. It would be good for him. So he did, he bought some goats, and he'd milk those goats, and then we'd drink that milk. But goats like to climb. These goats in this pen behind us here will climb on the fence. And we had a manure pile just outside the window of the barn, which was up this high. And the goat climbed on that and jumped over on the top of the barn. We were right up to the ridge of the barn. And when they came home from work on the bus, the Simmons guy saw that goat up on the barn. And that's when he started giving Dad a bad time. You can turn that off.
You want it turned off?
I don't know.
Just turn it off for a minute and see what